Hello guys, so today we are discussing about if Java is really dead or not. So is it a hoax or is it a reality? So we will start with some introduction. Let's start with Kunal.
Hi guys, my name is Kunal. I've been a Java co-mentor at Coding Blocks since January. I was a GSOC student this year with JBoss. I was working on the middleware technologies for Kubernetes OpenShift. My project was also like 99% Java, and currently I'm also a Microsoft student partner. Along us we have Rishpriya. He's an open source enthusiast. He's a GSOC mentor and an admin for the last 3 years with the organization JBoss under Red Hat. He's a ML instructor at Coding Blocks, and that's Rishpriya.
Yeah.
And here we have Shubham Bhaiya. He's a GCI mentor and collaborator at the Debizium project under JBoss, and he's also a Java instructor at Coding Blocks.
Cool. So let's start with some common
So
questions.
some of the common questions that we got are: Is it worthwhile to move to Java in 2019? So I would just like to state a very simple fact that if you go to the websites and type, which is the most popular programming language to learn in 2019, and at sites like TOIOB Index, you can see that the most popular language is Java, following C and Python. And along with this, if you do try to do some research in other websites, you will find that Java is widely used in the industry currently. So I would like to pass on this question to Anish Bhaiya, who's been working with Java for a few years now, so he would like to give his input.
Yeah, so if we talk about the popularity of Java, so it is more toward that, let us suppose a new bank or maybe an old bank like HDFC want to start their new infrastructure. So they have passed this responsibility to Morgan Stanley, and if you go for that, you will find that the product that would be released 3 years later from now is still being built on Java using the technologies like Spring Boot, Hibernate, and these kind of concepts. So we can see that even though many new technologies are emerging, we are still depending on Java for the things which have some transactional nature, right? So we cannot really skip the popularity and the use case of Java in terms of enterprise nature, right? So do you have anything to add?
Yeah, even today, most of the companies are using Java for developing enterprise level apps or like applications if they want to. And plus, if you are starting or if you are a beginner in programming culture, then you can obviously opt for Java because it helps you build your basics from the very scratch. Okay.
Yeah, so you also have worked with the Debizium project, right?
Yeah.
So Debizium project, why you feel that it was using a lot of Java concept, even though they could use Ruby or Python or something like that. So they were using Java and at its scope. Why so?
Yeah, Debizium was a great project. Like generally, it was also focused, like you said, upon transaction. So basically, it was upon transaction itself only.
Yeah.
It was to capture all the changes that were going on in the database. So
Yeah.
if you are talking about a bank or any system like that, so whenever there is a transaction made, so there might be a change in the database. So
Yeah.
obviously, they are using Debizium to capture those changes. So I think Java is still like being vastly used in these big tech
These kind
giants
of- yeah.
like Red Hat.
Yeah,
Yeah.
certainly. So what I could understand from what you said about Debizium is that if you make any changes into database, so we get the stream of those changes. So like it is like if you talk about some real-time databases like Google have some real-time database. If there's some changes occurring in the database, we get those changes as a stream, right?
Yes, exactly.
Yeah. Okay. Cool. So for such kind of product, we can see that the Java is still very useful. And let's move toward what the student had to say about the questions that we asked about these kind of technologies. Like,
Yeah, so one question we got is that another very popular hype going on currently is Python, and we got many questions like whether Java and Python have any similarities, which one we should start learning if we're choosing our first programming language, and all those things.
Yeah.
So we have a question from Praveen. Yeah, whether Java and Python have any similarities.
Yeah.
So yeah, in terms of paradigm versus strictness, yeah, they do have some similarities. I would like to pass this question
Yeah.
to
yeah.
Anushka.
So if we consider about the similarities, general trend that student get confused with is that what is object-oriented language and what is object-oriented paradigm. So we consider a language as a either object-oriented language or some functional language or procedural language. That used to be a very key concept in the past. But if you consider the concept right now, we do not have any specific language which only follow one set of rules. If we talk about Python, if we talk about Java, they have some way you could use them as an object-oriented language, and some way you can use them as a functional language. So they only follow some paradigms. So if we talk about a very simple paradigm like object-oriented paradigm, both Java, Python, C++, and all these languages use same paradigms and hence the same rule sets. So in this whole structure, they are very similar. Python and Java are very similar if we talk about the object-oriented paradigm. Yeah, in case of functional paradigm, their behavior differ a lot, but in object-oriented paradigm, it is very similar. But obviously, as we move forward, we will see a lot of changes and other kind of things that go through with it. But yeah, if we talk about Python, it is a good language, and we will also covering a bit of its benefits and comparisons with the Java throughout our session. Yeah.
So we got a question from Pratik Kumar that why shouldn't we start with Python if it's easier language as compared to Java? So Pratik, if you're starting with your first language in college, if you're in some year and the first language that you're trying to learn is Python, that is usually not suggested if you're trying to go for a development job after your college life, because obviously after your studies you're going to be doing development. Yeah, definitely. So many of the basic development concepts like Anuj Bhaiya just mentioned, like object-oriented programming and all those things, they are basically abstracted in Python. Python हमारे लिए easy है, लेकिन the object-oriented concepts and various other concepts, like it's not very strongly typed, right? So जिन लोगों ने वो बनाई होगी उनके लिए तो वो काफ़ी difficult होगा in order कि हमारे लिए syntax लिखना आसान हो जाए. So you might be getting my point that the basic fundamentals of programming in development, one of the basic fundamentals that you should be strong in when it comes to development is object-oriented programming. I think we all agree on that.
Yeah, that is right.
So in Python, topics like abstraction, encapsulation, and all those things, they are kind of hidden.
Yeah, certainly.
You don't get to implement those as a strongly typed language. So if you take an example of Java or even C++, you have more control over these paradigms.
Yeah.
So after learning Java, after that if you go to Python, then you can see, oh, okay, ये इसमें hidden कर रखा है, so this was missing. This is how it actually is, and this is how they have hidden this in Python. So then you would get a more way of approach of that thing.
So for Shubham, I think we were discussing about why Python can be a really good language for the beginning if we are talking about school students, or if somebody is not from technical background like MBA guys. So what is your viewpoint on that?
Yeah, like if you are a starter, if you are at school level, so generally learning Java can be a bit complex. थोड़ा tough लगेगा because obviously उसका syntax थोड़ा बड़ा होता है, and it is a bit difficult to understand what is written, like system.out.println. If you can only write print in Python, then why not do it?
Yeah,
so
certainly.
if you are at school level, so मैं यही बोलूँगा कि yeah, you can go with Python. तुम्हें basically तो programming में interest जगाना है ना.
Certainly.
तो अगर तुम्हें Python में वो चीज़ मिल रही है तो तुम कर सकते हो. Why not go with it?
Yeah. But if we talk about a college student, the thing that changed with that is that you have a very limited time. Like you have 4 years, and on top of that, you can see that only first 3 years you can make productive. And you don't want to learn a lot of programming language as you move forward. Like if you go for an interview and you say that, okay, I'm expert at one language, or you say that, oh, I can write hello world in 20 programming languages. You obviously know that a person will only prefer the guy who have one language and expert, and you should choose that language from which you can jump to another language only in 10 to 15 days. So if you talk about Python, then Python, as it abstracts some concept, if you shift to another language where you need those concepts, you will be stuck with that, right? You want those concepts to be inbuilt in your confidence, inbuilt in your knowledge base, right? So if you have concept with either C++ or Java, that way you can jump into any other programming language only 10 to 15 days. So that is the only reason we are talking about why you should start with these languages instead of Python and some higher level languages. So yeah, that do not completely cover what is exactly the benefit of Java, but it covers why exactly Python is not any bad language. It is just depending on why you should first start with Java or C++ or this kind of language when you're in your first year or second year or third year of college, right? So that should be your first language if you're going for a technical course and you want to go for some software development jobs, right? Okay, so what is the next question?
Okay, so a few questions that we got were from undergrad students. Basically, any language that they're trying to learn in their college life, basically, they want to look at two prospects. What does that language offer in terms of development,
Okay.
and what does it offer in terms of competitive programming?
Okay, yeah.
So these are the
certainly.
two aspects for
Certainly.
that we should discuss upon. So first, we will be discussing about development. We have a very good question from Ash. He says that he asked that Python has PyPy for third-party libraries. What does Java have? So Ash, Java has Maven Central. To elaborate on this topic, I will ask
Yeah,
Anupriya.
so many of you don't know about what PyPy is. So PyPy is Python Packaging Index. So you can have a lot of third-party libraries, and third-party libraries have to be located somewhere so that you can download that and use that. So PyPy is a location. Generally, you use that in that sense. But if you talk about Java, so you use third-party downloaders like maybe Maven or Gradle for using such kind of tools. And generally, Maven has some specific type of structure named Maven Central, and maybe if you want to use JCenter, such kind of thing. So they have a very specific way you can store the content inside it. So you have to store three parts. You start with if you get to know about any package, they generally have three information. That is uh, pack, artifact ID, group ID, and the version number.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah.
so the topmost version is group ID, right? So let us suppose you say if you have some coding blocks products, they will revert its domain. Like if we have codingblocks.com, so its group ID would be like com.codingblocks.servers, right?
Yeah,
exactly. And these kind of thing. So we package the content that way and we push them toward Maven Center and such kind of thing, and then we can use either Maven or Gradle or such kind of tool to download these from Maven Center or Gradle, right? So, but the point is that why we don't exactly use those kind of libraries. We do not download them locally and use them. Why we want to download them from Maven Central or JCenter, these kind of things. So obviously the main reason is that we want to use the content of somebody else. If we have everything built of our own, we would generally use it from our own locations only, right? We want to host or we want to use from some hosted places because we want to use the content of somebody else, that is third party tools. And the third party tools are generally key, if we talk about from where we generally use third party tools, it's from open source, right? So I think I will pass to Shubham about his experience with third-party tools and open source.
Yeah, contributing with Java in open source was a great experience. So the organization I chose for contributing was JBoss. So I got to know about many tools there. One of a new technology which is currently trending with Red Hat too is Quarkus. So Quarkus is basically a Java framework. It is tailored in such a way that if you are if you are running a server, like if you made some changes, then they are not present at the runtime. You need to first stop the server and then you are going to start it. So much time consuming. Why do that?
Yeah.
It's always working on the runtime. If you made any changes here on the server, they will be like reflected in the server.
Yeah. But the point is, if we talk about that, if we had to use such kind of thing without using Gradle or Maven, then what we generally have to do is we have to download all the dependencies locally, and we have to use such kind of thing, which is a long time consuming process. And the problem about is that we generally have a directed acyclic graph of dependencies, and you can say that if we simply talk about Quarkus, it generally have hundreds and hundreds of dependencies, and which are transitive dependencies, that this dependency depend on this and that and that and that. So if version number of a particular dependency change, the whole chain is now different from its original state, and which can be a very complex process to manage by your own. So according to PyPy, we have Maven, Maven Central and JCenter. But if I talk about Java, have a very detailed alternative. Like if we say that we do not have any alternative of Maven inside Python. We cannot really automate the whole process. Even though we have setup.py and these kind of things, but they cannot really function as well as good as Grader, right? So let's move toward our new question.
So we have a lot of questions about regarding open source.
Right.
So we have a question from Shweta: what open source is and how can we start contributing? And basically general questions like how to find projects and all those things.
Yeah.
So Shweta, open source, yeah, it's a very good way to get real world software development experience from the comfort of your home. You don't really have to be even if you're a beginner in a technology and you want to test your skills, you can pick up an open source project related to that technology and start making your contributions to know where you stand. You also get to learn a lot, and you also get to meet a lot of people and get involved in the community, which is obviously a very, very good thing in today's time.
Certainly.
Getting involved in the communities. So while I was a GSOC student this year, and I learned about so many technologies that I didn't even heard of. Technologies such as Docker, Kubernetes, like OpenShift, and all those things. So these are containerization applications which are currently being used in almost every of the projects. Many of the projects that were not containerized, they are moving to Docker because the main motive is to it should really make it easier to scale your applications, to deploy your applications, to test your applications, and Docker provides a very, very very simple way of doing these things. So many of the technologies are now shifting to Docker. You don't really need to have any prerequisites for these, but you can start looking into those. My project was a Kubernetes client, which is used to handle Kubernetes and OpenShift resources. It was written in Java, 99% Java. It was also a JBoss project.
And what was its name?
Kubernetes client, the Fabricate.io Kubernetes client.
Okay.
It's on the GitHub. It's open source. If any of the Java developers out there trying to look into some DevOps project, you can take a look.
Okay.
As Shubham also mentioned about Quarkus and Debezium in open source, and to get a general sense about this, I would like to point to Anushya, who's been involved in open source for quite some time now.
Yeah, so what I generally talk about open source is that it is a lifestyle. You do not really go for open source for some kind of certificate or some kind of acknowledgement. It is the whole learning process. And if I combine open source and Java, both are my favorite parts. So I started teaching because my passion was to involve everybody into the learning passion and learning strategies, and open source really have helped a lot of guys in the same process. So open source follow 4 rules. A code can be called open source if you can use the code, if it is publicly accessible, if you can change it, if you can use it, and if you can redistribute it. Obviously, you can see that these are not 4 same things. These are 4 different things. Like if you have a bike openly available, you do not just go and hop on and use it. Like मेरी bike है मैं use करेगा, ठीक है. Then the second point is that if that bike is openly available and तुम उसको use भी कर सकते हो, it's not like कि तुम उसको use कर रहे हो, तुम्हारे पास use करने की permission है, तुम्हारे को change करने की permission मिल गया. You cannot really change that, okay. And even though तुम्हारे को change करने की permission मिल गया, you don't have a permission to redistribute. तुम ऐसा नहीं कि उसको अपने जाके दोस्त को दे के आ गए, right? So you do not have these kind of permission. You have to take each and every permission individually, and if all those permissions are available with you, in that case you can call a software into a open source software, right? So but these kind of thing can really help in that phase of learning. In what sense? Because if you want to be like a good poet, you have to read a lot of poems. If you want to be a cricketer, you see a lot of people playing cricket, so that you have a good exposure of what exactly how to do in what kind of case. But what if you have to become a developer of especially a good quality? You want to write some good quality content, good quality code. So you cannot simply be that I will write a lot of code and I will improve myself. You have to see how good developers are writing their code and how they are interacting with them. And specifically, if you want to learn Java, go in depth with Java, I generally suggest organization like JBoss. And if you simply want to have a general idea about what different kind of organizations there can be, I generally suggest to open summerofcode.withgoogle.com. Why I'm specifically specifying GSOC in this process is that do not go for the certificate of GSOC. Do not go for, even though it is good, but do not target certificate. Target the learning part. Like Kunal have experienced the same process. He did GSOC the last year, and the whole process was learning part. If you target the certificate, the people who are on the other side are confident enough and they know what they are doing. They can certainly catch you that you are there not for learning and it is a temporary thing, right? So you have to be involved in terms of community, in terms of learning, and they generally prefer a person who will retain, right? They prefer less the person who will just move out and disappear.
GSOC isn't about getting selected, it's about staying with your organization after the GSOC period is over.
Certainly, right? So that way you can communicate, and the awesome thing is, even if you do not get selected, or even if you choose to move out from the GSOC, you can still remain connected in terms of like long-term contributors, like mentors, like maybe reviewer, pull request reviewers, and these kind of things. And that way you get connected on the long term, and you get networking part out of it. And so what I will provide you guys as a homework is that open the website, GSOC website, summer of code with google.com. Select 5 organizations, and if you get whatever kind of specifications, specific skill sets you have, and do not worry about it. You will not be having 100% skill set at the first go. You'll be having approximately 30-40% skill set, and that is perfectly fine because you will learn the remaining skills as you go with it, on the go, right? So that I think Shom also accept with it. So when you started with Debezium product, I think we started, I remember that in initial few days we were sitting together to run the product as well, right? Because I think it was quite a complicated product to start with, right? So what were the initial problem that you faced when you were working with the Debezium product?
Yeah, so when I started, the first thing is when you go to their website or you just talk to them or see their repositories. After looking at the code, you are like, "Bhai, mujhse nahi hoga."
Yeah, so the first
this is the reaction of everyone. Exactly.
Yeah.
It's like billion of lines of code. Like you can't understand it at one go.
You are exaggerating with billions of lines of code. That cannot be a billion lines of code.
To be precise, 6 million lines of code.
Okay.
Million lines.
So you have counted that.
No, I haven't counted myself, but there was a pull request which said that.
Oh, okay. A pull request.
Yeah.
Okay, yeah. So that only that way I was asked to count it, not like 1, 2, 3, 4. No, not that way, right?
Something like that.
Okay, we can stop at million.
Yeah.
Okay, we can stop at million. But like when I started working on it, the first thing was Docker. I didn't know about Docker, what it was. So obviously Anushya helped me in that. So the initial phase might be a bit tough. Like it might demotivate you sometimes that, oh God, I don't know this tech, or like I don't know this language. But don't worry about it. If you are like confident that yes, I need to contribute, then do it. You don't have to worry about what you know, what you don't know, because GSOC is all about learning.
Yeah.
When you go through this phase and when you will be out of this hard working phase, then you can say yourself that yes, you are a developer.
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
And one more thing is I want to continue from you only is that what was the benefit of Docker? I could see that using Docker really helped you in terms of initial setup, right? Because you were initially trying to build the your own code for different repositories, but later on you were using the pre-built Docker, and I think it helped you in setting up the content pretty easy. The database setup and these kind of setup were happening on its own because of the Docker. Yeah, so generally Docker have its Docker compose file. You just have to run it, and it generally grab a few layers of few different Docker images, and it kind of build the content for you. So if you talk about how to start with open source, generally I will say that you should start with some version control system like GitHub, these kind of things. Later on, the second thing is learn Docker. Why I'm specifying this thing so much is that initial setup of open source product is generally very complicated because you have to install a lot of things. You have to set up a big environment, right? a lot of environment variables, a lot of dependencies. But using Docker is, if I say in other words, it is like a virtual machine, but it is not exactly a virtual machine. It is an extra layer, and that way it create a very big simplicity as compared to virtual machine, because even if you set up a virtual machine, you really have to install a lot of content over it, and if you have to remove it and reinstall it, it is a lot of mess, right? You have to do everything on your own.
Yeah,
But if you're using
because
the,
yeah, in virtual machines, your space on the hard drive in the OS system is divided.
yeah,
So each separate space has its own separate operating system,
Mhm,
right?
yeah,
But in containerization, this concept is containerization versus virtualization.
yeah, certainly.
Virtualization is for VMs and containerization is for your Docker and all those things.
Yeah.
So in the containers that are running, containers को basically you can आप मान सकते हैं जैसे आपने कोई application बनाई है and it runs like a charm on your machine, but then you pass it on. Suppose I pass it on to Shubham and Shubham says यार इसमें ये run नहीं हो रहा, ये module missing है.
तो मेरा सिस्टम पे तो चल रहा था, तेरा पहले चल रहा, तेरी गलती है. हाँ.
So what you can do is you can take it as a recipe, like खाना बनाते हैं तो एक recipe होती है and उस recipe से dish बनती है. So basically there's a thing called Docker image जिसके अंदर सारी recipe listed होती है, like ये module लगेगी, ये code लगेगा, and from that recipe you create a container. You can think of it like a box, and I will ship that box to Shubham कि किसी भी हालत में अब ये चलेगी क्योंकि जो भी चीजें इसे रन करने के लिए चाहिए वो उस बॉक्स के अंदर है. Yeah, and that container is running on the same operating system. So you don't really have to create another operating system. So what this does is it's really fast. Suppose if you want to try out MongoDB without really installing MongoDB on your machine. So you can just quickly pull up a MongoDB image, and not just MongoDB, you can even run Ubuntu and all those things in a matter of minutes.
Yeah. Second would be too small, right? Yeah.
Pulling an image depends on your internet connection.
Yeah,
Takes a few minutes, but a minutes compared to running a virtual machine is very impressive.
Approximately hours.
Yeah,
you can say
very
that.
impressive.
So if we include the time of downloading and everything, and setting up an initial image, the time is very huge. But if we talk about the production servers and these kind of things, generally they say that running a Docker is approximately matter of seconds as compared to running a virtual machine, which take a few minutes. So when we said about minutes and hours, it was more like what you personally have to do on your personal operating system, because in that case you cannot really cache and bind and these kind of these kind of things with different kind of layers and stuff. But you can get these kind of comfort when you are using a Docker, right? So learn Git, learn Docker, learn the language that you want to be comfortable with. So if we talk about today's topic, so that can be Java, right? So Java can be the first good programming language, and as we move forward, we will discuss more about it. So if we talk about if we have to discuss some part as well, like that you have selected 5 open source organizations and you are moving forward with it. So you are, let us suppose, getting involved in chatting, like Kunal said, that be involved in their chatting, right? So open their IRC channels, open their Gitter channels, open their Slack channels, get involved in that, subscribe to their mailing list. And when you are doing these kind of things, you generally parallelly start with their documentation. Start reading their documentation, maybe contribute a bit to it if you feel there is some flaw, or if you feel that you got stuck and you couldn't understand the documentation itself. You can even talk with them. You can improve your documentation like that, because generally on the first go it is not very comfortable for the person who is in the software development for creating a documentation which is good for the beginner, right? Probably you have also faced that, because when a person is in the development from few years, they feel that a lot of things are obvious, which are not generally very obvious for the new guy, right? So you can really start helping them with the documentation part itself, and gradually moving forward, you set up your development environment. So when setting up development environment, Docker can help a lot, because you're not really installing a lot of things. And as moving forward, when you are in the development phase, we will continue that part in the next questions, right? Yeah.
So some of the questions we have are corresponding to, well, obviously interviews. This was expected.
Yeah, certainly.
So we have a question from from Gaurav. Java and competitive, will it work? So I would like to pass this question to Shubham.
Okay,
so
that's a good question. Like many students are confused that whether they should opt C++ or Java for competitive.
Yeah.
But I don't think that there is any problem opting for Java. Like, if you ask me, even I have also given many interviews, and I don't see any problem like writing a code in Java or any other language. Like, you can use, even some companies use Python too. If they're interested in the Python programming part, then obviously they will ask you to like code in Python. And second thing is, when we move on to like in this company part, so many companies we know that in dev, obviously Java and Python are a bit dominant. Yeah, we know that Java and Python are a bit dominant. So if you are writing a code in C++, yeah, it must be speedy, and yeah, you are giving a good, speedy and optimal solution to them. But when you are like, when you will go to the company, obviously you need to speed down a bit.
True.
Yeah.
So the point is that you probably are using in computer programming. You can run your code very fast with C++, but not many companies are using C++ in their development toolkit, right? So when you are reaching to the level when you are inside the company itself, you are writing your code in maybe the Java, Ruby, Python, or such kind of language which are a bit higher level, and you are reducing your speed because there are a lot of way to optimize the cost for your company, right? So one of the way is to use less resource, but the other way is that generally prefer more is that it is easy to start with, right? If you want your code to be up and running within a few days or maybe within a few hours, if you want to go for the agile process, you want something that can be easily scaled or easily started to some a bit boilerplate code, right? So that part is generally easier with Python, Java, and these kind of languages as compared with C++. So generally, do not just prepare for competitive when you are in the 12th standard and first few years of your college. Do not just prepare for the competitive. Data structures algorithm is an important part, but when you are going above that, you have to maintain a balance between competitive and development. And if you choose a language which is a very different part for both, if you want to go for development, you have to choose a different language, and if you want to go for development, it is a totally different language. That wouldn't make sense. Even though you can do some kind of development with C++ as well, if you want to create some operating system kernels and maybe whatever is close to hardware, generally that is preferred in C++. But if you want to create a server and these kind of things, like middleware or like create a maybe some desktop application or whatever is not very close to hardware, that is generally preferred with Java or some these kind of languages as compared to C++, right? Okay, so then what we are next?
As Anuj, we already mentioned, like the language doesn't really matter that much when coming to competitive programming. It's the concepts that you have about data structures and algorithms. I was watching the Google Code Jam live stream.
Okay.
There was this guy he was a finalist. He was using Ruby.
Oh,
so
Ruby as a finalist.
Most of the people use C++, and most of the people use Java as well. The world's top competitive programmers. There was a guy, he was giving live solutions from Google, and he was using Java. So Java is a very, very good language when it comes to competitive programming. And people usually complain about कि लिखना बहुत पड़ता है, but that is the beauty of Java, that you have the entire control in your hand. And that's it.
Even Java में big integer की भी library.
Big integer, and this is a personal preference. There are no pointers in Java, which I really like. So this is a personal preference. मुझे pointers नहीं पसंद थे.
So we got rid of them, right?
Yeah, we got rid of them. We have references.
Yeah. We have the baby reference.
Yeah,
right?
baby reference. That's an inside joke.
Yeah.
Okay, so we answered most of these questions regarding interviews. Vishesh and Anurag, both of them have asked Java is better or C++ or Python. So it really depends on your use case. If you're into kernels and all those things, then C++. But most of the students, they jump straight to Android or Android and
these kind of
development and modules and all those things.
That way Java makes more sense.
Because if you're learning Java, then you can straight on after learning Java, you can jump into development with a bit of extra work. It will give you a benefit over that.
You do not have to shift your language.
Don't have to really shift your language. Like if you want to learn Android after learning data structures and algorithms in Java, you can do that. No problem in that.
Yeah.
We have a question from Pavan. Is Java necessary if someone is good in C++?
Yeah, so that way I will say that it is not necessary. So it is, you can say that if you are inside a company, if you have done your C++ and that way after your data set algorithms and your first programming language, then you can really choose any language or any framework that you want to jump in. The key thing that we had to focus till this point was that your concept, your initial concept should be good. And if you have done that with one programming language that is covering all of the concepts, then you do not really have to do the same part with a different programming language. If you need that, that is fine. If like probably your product require the probably you need Objective C, you need Swift, or you need maybe Ruby. That way, it is very easy to begin with. You can kind of have some office hours for like 8 hours a day for 15 days, and you can shift between languages, and that is perfectly fine. But using totally understanding a new language when you have a good understanding of the previous language, that doesn't make sense if it is not needed, right? Okay, yeah, but I think from the previous question, I have some additional things to say. Like you generally have to go with the T learning. So what I mean by T learning is that there is some width and there is some depth. So the depth is very important when we say that go for a particular language and then understand it totally, right? Because if you do not have a depth in your knowledge, then you're it is more like that you are just like a guy in college who is saying that मेरे को ये आता है. So the good answer to that would be तो मैं क्या करूँ, right? So तेरे को आता है तो आता है. But generally these kind of people who are bragging a lot in the college itself, generally they are very hollow because learning a lot of things in the very beginning and do not having a depth knowledge inside that is a very dangerous job. You really cannot move toward a different strategy, because if a person is not having good concept of how exactly objects work, so he probably understood basic of Java and then is shifting to Python. He will feel that why everything is so different, but in reality everything is so same inside Java or Python or any such language. If we talk about internal working is so same. The only reason is that you're not having the depth knowledge. Because of that, you're feeling that they are so different. Otherwise, it is a lot of concept remains same in between languages. Right.
So we have a question from Pratik Kamra about Java in 2019, because we have technologies such as Flutter, React Native for development, and Kotlin.
Yeah.
So as Anish already mentioned, the T-shaped learning.
Exactly.
Yeah. So you don't really have to be like मैं तो Java ही करूँगा और कुछ नहीं करना. Java is the most widely used language. Like no need to do anything else. That's not the point. As Anish already mentioned regarding this.
Yeah. So doing Kotlin is fine, doing Flutter is fine, but the point is that if you are already comfortable with one basic language or not, because when you're using Kotlin, when you're using Flutter, you are reducing a lot of code and a lot of understanding of the inbuilt concept that you needed to have if you want to be comfortable in shifting between the programming languages. And that kind of comfort, Flutter is not a language, Flutter is a framework. If we talk about the language, that language would be Dart. So Dart is not a language that I will suggest a person to learn in the first go, right? Because it is hiding a lot of concept that you should have understood when you are done with the initial concept of your programming. So I think Dart is not a suggested language for that. If you talk about you say about React.js, JavaScript is not a good enough language. Like if you talk about array, so generally when you talk about array in your initial thought, you have like contiguous memory allocation, these kind of things. But Python do not have array. Python have list. That is some kind of in between linked list and array list. So that is a very if I talk about these kind of data structure, you cannot really specify them inside Python. So even though that is very good for creating some simple code, if I want to create array kind of thing, but it should use it should not take a lot of space, and it should not take a lot of I should say instruction cycles for inserting something in between. So it is taking the behavior of linked list. So Python have this list that can take the behavior of linked list as well as array list, but that way it is a good thing if it is pre-implemented. But if I want to use specifically the behavior of array itself, that is not available inside the Python in that case particularly. So same way if we talk about JavaScript is using the concept of key value pair. So even if you are using array, you are kind of using a, I should say, a hash map or hash table. So that way it is not exactly an array. But if you use Java or C++ maybe in that particular case, you are exactly learning what should be needed for understanding these concepts. So after you are done with either C++ or Java as your first language, you can jump for Flutter or this kind of thing which use Dart or such kind of languages. But if it is your first language, then it wouldn't make really a lot of sense if you are starting with these, right? So I think there is one question that I think we had one question about ML, right?
Yeah, we have a question from. Okay, the name is not specified. It's an anonymous question. So,
okay.
How do developers use AI written in Python on Android?
Yeah, that's a very nice question. So if you generally we have a very misconception that this thing run on this platform, this thing run on this platform. So if you want to write for Android, you have to write in Java. But the point is not that in which language we have to write. It is more about the execution, how execution work. So Android use some kind of a JVM similar thing. So that way, generally, we had an initial conception that we should start with Java. But Java as a language and JDK or JVM as a platform, they are very similar and very different things, right? So Java as a language can be used, can be disposed, that depend on exactly your product. But JVM in itself is a big platform. If you are using Python as a language, you probably is using JPython. Right? Jython. Jython is Java implementation of Python. If you are using Ruby, probably you are using JRuby, right? So that is you are using the language, but you are implementing it on the JVM, right? So that way you are taking the benefits that Java applications generally have, but you are not really coding in it. So what generally happens when you are writing your code in Python, particularly AI code, and you want to run it on Android, so generally the concept is about transpilation. So generally, if we talk about compiler, we have a thought that compiler is something which convert from high level to low level, but that is not the case. Compiler is something only which convert from one language to another language. So we have two concepts: compiler and interpreter. So compiler is like totally read it and shift it into another language, and interpreter is like read line by line. If I say that I have to compile this English book into Hindi, right? So it is not like that English is high level, Hindi is low level. It is totally a different level. So what will happen is that if I say that I want to compile this book, I will only get the total compiled book. I will not be like you read this line if it makes sense to you, if it is making sense, if it is making sense to you, if it is making sense to you. No, but interpretation is very different. Interpretation is like reading line by line, converting it, and the second person who can understand the second language will give you feedback. Okay, I'm not able to understand this concept. I'm not able to understand this logic. What are you saying, right? So that is the part which is different. But if we talk about in the total process, it generally even say that, or if I even counter my own point, it don't have to be even two different languages. Like if we have English only, but one is the English that can be understood by a doctor, and one is the English which is understood by a lawyer, right? So if, in that case, you also interpret and compile the content into from the understandable from one person to another. So that way we can say that if we talk about a programming language specifying Python code or Java code, it is more like that only. So Java, if I say about Android, it needs something that can run on JVM, and that is something that we can do if we are writing the Python code, because that we only specifying the logic that we have to run, and then we can transpile that logic into JVM runnable code, and that we can run on our Android applications, right? So let's move forward.
So another development question we have from Manik Jain. Can we learn web development without Java, like JavaScript?
Yeah, certainly.
Yeah.
JavaScript and Java is more like JavaScript and Java related, like car and related to carpet, right?
Yeah.
So maybe there can be a lot of silly examples. as well. But you certainly do not have to learn Java and JavaScript. I think we have two examples. Like Shubham is doing all of most of the web development using JavaScript, and Kunal is using for web development. You are using mostly Java, right?
Yeah, more Java, and I've been working with Node as well.
Okay, so right now
Yeah.
JavaScript as well, but he didn't have to, right? So
Yeah,
you could
obvious.
totally use different yeah, right. So that is totally up to you. So if we say about so Java have a different use case, JavaScript have a different use case. So if you want to do parallelism, right? If you want to use multi-threading or multi-processing, go for Java. But if you want to go for async, go for JavaScript. Even though these are the broad terms, like you can use async in Java itself with the help of if I say even Quarkus, we are using some different concept. Maybe if you don't want to go for Quarkus, on the basic level, the internal part of Quarkus which is providing async is Vertex. So with the help of Vertex within Java, you can have the concept of async, but you can even go for JavaScript if you want to go for the concept of async, right? But right now we do not have the concept of multi-threading in JavaScript. So if you want, there are two kind of scaling: vertical scaling and horizontal scaling. So JavaScript is providing the horizontal scaling, but not vertical scaling, right? So if you want to make applications which are both horizontal and vertically scalable, then you have to go for a language which provide the concept of multi-threading, multiprocessing, as well as the concept of async, right? So that way, Java can be a preferred language, or maybe Groovy or Ruby and this kind of language, but not a language which do not have the concept of threads, right? Okay.
Yeah, actually, it's a very important topic as well for interviews. Threading.
Yeah, threading. Yeah,
Yeah,
threading in
threading,
Java. Yeah. So if you are a Java developer, you have to go for that. It is kind of mandatory. Right?
So we have another question from Priyansh. He asked, "What is the first step to start Java programming?" So Priyansh, I think one of the
Just do it.
Nice, just do it.
Nike, just do it. I think that one of the best ways to learn a programming language, if you look into the data structures and algorithms implementation in that programming language. If you try to implement all the basic and even complex data structures like hash map and graphs in Java, then you would get a basic idea of the internal working of the language and as well as the implementation of the language. So these are the first steps to start learning any programming language, not just Java. If you can implement your own data structures in that programming language, that would be a very good start. And after that, you can look into development. So you would like to add something to this?
Yeah. So point is generally what student generally get stuck with is that if I specify his question more properly, if there is any prerequisite to that as well, right?
Yeah.
So should I learn anything before I start to go, with Java? So that is not something that you need. Generally, some people may say that start with C, then C++, then Java, then go for any other language that you need. But that is not the case because it is more like selling strategy for some people. Like first we will sell you the C course, then C++ course, then blah blah course, then Java course. But that is not the case. Why you have to learn multiple languages? If you want to go for C++, start with C++. If you want to go for Java, start with Java. But generally, I say that okay, just hold on for that, right? Because maybe at some time in future we do not need some detailing like C++ or Java at the beginner level when we can simply skip these concepts. But right now, if we have to cover all the languages, we have to cover these concepts that these languages provide, right? So that way, I will say that if you start with Java, you do not have to have a prior knowledge about the previous concepts. And if I speak in terms of a book that you can refer, I will say that Thinking in Java can be a very awesome book in terms of how it elaborate, and Core Java by K. Horstman can be a very awesome book if you want to elaborate in terms of Java as a programming language itself. But I will generally say that do not stick with the language itself when you are learning it. Also add the concept of data structures and algorithms to it, right?
Yeah.
So Shom will specify where exactly data set algorithms is very important.
Yeah. See, one more thing which I want to add is like many students come up to me and they say that I guess I'm losing interest somewhere in Java. What is this data structure? How it is gonna help me? So these are some questions which occur in every student's mind.
Yeah.
So what I would say is that if you are, it is necessary to focus on data structures because obviously that is going to give you a job. Whenever you will go to a company, they will definitely ask you questions on data structures.
Yeah.
But the thing is, when you enter that company, just like you said, obviously when we will enter that company, we need to do development.
Yeah.
So the best thing which I would suggest is do data structures 4-5 hours. Do it. But the thing is, if you are getting bored, then you can do some development too.
Yeah, certainly. That is the balance that you have to.
Yeah, because in development also data structures and algorithms are extensively used. If you
Yeah.
take a look at Git, internally it works like a linked list.
Directed to cyclic graph to be very
Directly,
specific.
specifically. And with data structures and algorithms comes time complexity.
Yeah, scale and time
So
complexity.
to make your application run smoother and better as compared to previous versions, you need to know what you're doing wrong. How can this method be improved?
Yeah.
So the basic fundamentals for that are data structures and algorithms, because the way you're storing data, even if you're using file systems and all those things, they work like trees or graphs or something like that internally. But if you do know the time complexity of your implementation, you can obviously modify it and enhance it. So in development, it's a very good trick. It comes in very handy if you are thorough with data structures and algorithms.
You're right.
I was saying that we were talking about data structures and algorithms. So Hoax also plays a very
that is true.
development.
You cannot really object-oriented principles. You may say that this is the new world of functional programming, but even if you take any example of any functional programming, generally, rarely you will find a language where functional is used, but object-oriented is not used. In the modern languages, generally you have paradigms, not a language itself, so specifying a particular concept, right? So if you take an example of any such language, you will find that the object-oriented concept and the functional concept both are very important. And if the kind of reason why C is not that much used anymore in terms of development is that C++ is this kind of language where you have object-oriented principle. It is going to help you in the long run a lot. And the thing about the data set algorithms, like you are continuing, that if you have the concept about how exactly everything is internally happening, you can be a good developer. And obviously, if you get stuck with why exactly I'm using data set algorithms, why how it can benefit me, it have to be added up. You have to mix two things to have a better understanding and to have a better confidence in what you exactly want to do, right? So that way you can add up the the thoda mesh masala, object-oriented principle ka, some object-oriented data structure algorithm, some development. So that way you can add up. This is giving me this benefit, this is giving me this benefit. So in overall, I'm getting what exactly I expect things to work, right?
As most of the questions are from beginner students who have not done development before. So once you become a developer, and after that, getting your hands onto any other technologies, it's not going to be that difficult if you already have some development experience. And regarding that, Java is a very good language to get your first development experience.
Yes, it is.
And one thing which I want to add is that please never skip data structure. Like if you want to search in a list, if you only know a linear search, then obviously it will take too much time. Or in a sorted data, you would be doing linear search, and it will take that linear complexity. So when you have binary search, you can do it like in log and complexity.
A canary search, like ternary search,
exactly.
Enhanced binary search,
So
this kind of things.
if you don't know about these concepts, then how would you do it? Obviously, a company would require a person who is able to give them an optimal solution. Right. So,
Okay, regarding that, we have a question from Anju and Ekta about the future scope of Java and the jobs and internship opportunities in Java.
Yeah. Okay, so
The most important question.
Okay, job bhai bahut hai, theek hai. So if you the most comfortable answer I can provide you is go for any job portal and go search for Java, and you will find that the most job available right now would be available in Java, right? So go for Shine, maybe, or go for some other tech.
Internship.
Internship is for internship, right? But
even LinkedIn or
Naukri.com,
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 Glassdoor,
these kind of things, you will find that there are a lot of jobs that are available. And the second thing is that what are the possibilities? What are the future possibilities? You will find that there are a lot of future possibilities with Java. But generally, where people get stuck is that they want to go for development within Java, but they do not choose the right stacks, right? They do not choose the right development process. Like if you go for, if you simply go for any random playlist, you might go for, JSP servlet, right?
Okay.
So it is pain of Shivam because when he first came to me, I'm learning Java and I'm at good level because I've already completed, JSP servlet, right? So, but the point is that if we talk about JSP servlet, they are, kind of abandoned from the industry already. If you are going for Java as a development, you have to go for Spring Boot, Hibernate, and some good level of concept that you have to begin with. And some people may misguide you in terms of that you have to have some basic level concept if you want to go for higher level in Java. But just take the example like uh, you are doing similar kind of dependency injection and these kind of things with JavaScript and Python, but you skip these concepts when you are learning JavaScript and Python. But some people may say that, but when you are learning Java, it is important to understand this concept in the depth. Why so? You can skip the very ground level thing. When you are moving up, at some point you have to skim very ground level thing. So if you do not want to really skip it, you can skim over it. Okay, so just read it, but do not get involved so much that I want to make a very big application just using the concept of maybe JSP and servlet itself. That I will not be using some Spring Boot and some other high level concept. I will be just using the minor level concept. So that can really harm you a lot in terms of development, right? So you will be wasting a lot of time in doing and learning stuff that you do not really be using when you are in industry, right? So that way, I will say that go for Java as a in the learning part. It is having a future scope in terms of whatever kind of thing you want in web application. Web application really cannot really work without Java, right? So wherever whatever kind of application you are making, generally at some point they're using Java. Wherever you want transactions, Java cannot be skipped. If you talk about if I talked about horizontal and vertical scaling, wherever you want both vertical and horizontal scaling at the same time, Java cannot be skipped. Wherever you want something to be a bit more secured, Java cannot be skipped because if you talk about Python as a kind of language, what the problem generally happens is that even though they are these are competing technologies, but if you talk about let us suppose web development, or if you hire a new person and you cannot really control the quality of his code, he can mess up with the things that other people are doing, right? Because there is not that much level of abstraction and encapsulation that can be applied within Python itself. So that can really harm the way your code is working, and that is really something that you want to skip in your enterprise level code. So that way, generally, Java is a bit more preferred language inside enterprise. I'm not saying that Python cannot really make enterprise code. Python can really make a very awesome enterprise code as well. But it is just like that. It is more secure to do it with Java. Okay.
If you want to take an example for Python for enterprise, Instagram.
Yeah.
It's fully Python, but they are running. There are some issues. I read an article that the code shipping, when they make a change, the shipping is slow, something like that. So that's something that they're working on.
Yeah.
So for this shipping and all those things, you can take a look into Quarkus, like Shubham mentioned.
Yeah.
Makes shipping code in Java very, very fast.
Yeah, and Quarkus is very funny thing. Quarkus is very awesome thing because Quarkus is even though a Java concept, a Java technical tool, but point is that it have a polyglot feature that you can write some part in Java, you can write some Python, some part in Python, you can write some part in C or C++, and you can collectively run it on a JVM using GraalVM. Okay, so like you have Oracle JVM, you have OpenJDK and this kind of concept. So there is there is a specific virtual machine that is GraalVM. And by using the concept of GraalVM, you can GraalVM and Quarkus, you can make a web application that some part is Java, some part is Python, some part is C++, and you can just collect it and run it over your GraalVM using Quarkus.
So we have a last question. This is a kind of a funny question by Gaurav Singh. How can I surpass you?
Okay, so this question is for me.
I'm just going to hand it over to Anush.
Okay. So it is a very good question. So the point of this thing is not about a single person. So surpassing me is very easy. You just have to be consistent. You just have to be consistent in learning. You just have to be consistent in growing, and you have to be consistent in helping. Because you be average of the 5 people around you, and if you take the help of people who are better than you, you become better with them. But the point is, generally we are very lazy in terms of the tendency. So generally we leave out the connection that we have with some better people. And what where it leaves us is the same position. If I'm climbing up, but at some point I leave the rope, I will be back here. But what if I help my fellow mates along with me, and then when I'm growing, and even if I leave the person who was supporting me from top, even at that point I will be left where my fellows will catch me. They will help me along with them. So if you want to surpass a person who is already growing good, is to take help from them and help others who will eventually make the system better, where you can grow more. But if because if the system is not at the state where you can keep moving forward, a person will grab from you from behind, and they will drag you toward them. So either support other and move forward together, or face the issues where everybody is stuck at the same level, right? So I think that's all for today.
Yeah, that was the last question. If you guys have any other questions, you can
post in the comments
post it
below,
in the
and
comment section. We will try to answer
in the next videos.
videos.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.